We welcome you to episode 34 of Full Throttle, the Presidio Group's automotive industry podcast. And I'm your host, Jason Stein, Director of Multimedia and Events at Presidio. On a regular basis, Full Throttle serves as the industry's meeting point for great conversations with leaders across the automotive world.
And so what we're endeavoring to do is flip the switch on what people think succession planning is, because the type of succession we do is all about growth, creating options for the dealer and the family, so they can essentially write their story on their terms. They're not being pushed out.
There's nothing easy about the succession process, but can it actually be informative and interesting and a tad fun? Kendall Rawls believes so. As the Director of Development at the Rawls Group, she's also an owner and a family member in a second-generation business that helps generational businesses find a way forward. But Kendall and her team do it in a way that respects the delicate nature of the job while asking all of the tough questions directly and with purpose. Her content studio is filled with resources on many subjects, and she's the driving force behind the thought leadership that's putting the group at the forefront of many discussions. The tactics are simple and effective, and the titles of the material are the same. How to deal with in-laws, how to not fear the election results, what to say to your grandchildren who want into the business. Today on the program, we talk about all of those issues while also discussing how Kendall and her Rawls team put a complex topic on display in a way that's easily understandable and perhaps a bit more approachable. It's a different side of the succession topic from the person who's attempting to make it easier to discuss. Today on Full Throttle.
Hi, I'm Kendall Rawls, and this is Presidio's podcast, Full Throttle.
What a pleasure to have you on the program, Kendall. How are you?
I'm great. It's Friday, and it's a great day.
That's right. Yesterday, coincidentally enough, you released a little bit more content. You actually release a lot of content on a regular basis, but this one kind of caught my eye. And on the Rawls Group site, which really deals with business succession planning and all kinds of things that we're going to talk about today, you had a headline: the 10 must-know tips for hiring in-laws in a family business. Now, in terms of search engine optimization, I don't think you could have had a better headline for attracting people's attention. It was a grabber. Hiring in-laws into your family business. We'll talk about that, but I want to talk about Dr. Merlot first. Tell me the genesis and the origin of Dr. Merlot, who is in this video that you posted.
Yes, we have been on a journey with Dr. Merlot. So Dr. Merlot, if any of you guys know my dad, Lloyd Rawls, who is the founder of the Rawls Group, he has a very creative side that sometimes people get and sometimes people don't. I can relate because I am very similar to him. And about, I don't know how long ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago, he began to leverage this character that he created, Dr. Merlot, to speak a little bit more directly in his writing and his articles. He's a big, avid writer. So he could have the voice of Lloyd Rawls, which in a sense, he tries to be more polished and politically correct, diplomatic. But as his time and journey working with different family businesses and working with just a variety of leaders and families, he found that he needed some sort of outlet to speak more direct, because a lot of the issues needed more of a direct voice versus this diplomatic voice. So that was where Dr. Merlot was born. So he is the alter ego of Lloyd Rawls. If you read any of his stuff or see these videos on our website, Dr. Merlot is a little bit more crass, and he wears his hat backwards, and we'll just give you the straight talk of any sort of topic relating around family business, succession planning, or building a business.
It's straight talk. It is lighthearted, though. It does lighten the mood, which I know is the point. And really, he has a lot to say on how to manage what are delicate topics. Hats backwards, glass of wine in hand. I noticed there was a cigar that was to his right in a tray. But it's a way to get through, isn't it, Kendall?
Absolutely, yeah. I think one, family business dynamics can be very emotionally charged, complex, And I would say in general, the professional service environment can feel a little stuffy, having to be polished and just kind of that, I mean, that advisor thing where you have to be really polished and put together. And so what Dr. Merlot brings is a way to talk about some hard topics with some levity. If you're dealing with in-laws in the family business and they're really creating some heartburn, that's something that is incredibly stressful and can impact family life, business life. It impacts all life. And so talking about something with a little bit of levity, hopefully will allow family business owners and family business members and key leaders to take some of these nuggets of information and apply them a little bit differently versus be in this fear state, where oftentimes in fear state, there are no solutions. There are only problems. So it definitely helps create some levity and hopefully create even more of a personality for the Rawls Group, where we're not so stuffy, because we're also a family business. We're also dealing with many of the issues that our clients are dealing with on a different scale. But this stuff is real and it's related to humanity. And so it's also approachable.
Yeah, wonderful. You told just a quick funny story about NADA and Dr. Merlot. Can you share that for a moment with our guests?
Yeah, absolutely. I play multiple roles in the business. One is marketing, business development. And I wouldn't say this is my business role, but I'm also a daughter of the founder, an owner of the business, and look at this business for longevity. And so when my dad began to talk about or write about Dr. Merlot as a voice and some of his articles, one thing happened first. We had submitted an article to Digital Dealer, and the editor there asked if we had permission from Dr. Merlot to be featured in this article. And so I very sheepishly had to explain that Dr. Merlot is my dad's alter ego, some may call invisible friend, and that he was of mental sound and was a professional, sound mental capacity, but it just was his way of creatively writing about these topics. And because of that, I began to try and find ways to secretly snuff out Dr. Merlot, because one, I was like, well, our customers and clients and the family business community at large understand it, or will it just be lost? I was concerned about how it would be delivered. And then I think my dad began to feel that I was trying to find a way to phase Dr. Merlot out. And he began to tell me at NADA 5 or 6 years ago that, hey, Kendall, people are coming up to me left and right asking me for Dr. Merlot. Where's Dr. Merlot? Can you give me a Dr. Merlot quote?
Wow.
So in that moment, I decided, if you can't beat them, join them. So we dove right in, created essentially a brand around it, created this video series. And this topic actually is from one of my dad's latest books. We haven't published it yet, Family Business Heartburn Relief. So what we're doing is slowly beginning to feature some of the chapters or topics or questions in that. And he's written with his co-writer, Dr. Merlot, this book. So that's where this content has come from. And that's essentially the story of how Dr. Merlot lived another day.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Wonderful. What a great way to explain some delicate issues, as we said. And I know you are responsible for so much of the content that Rawls Group produces. And it is an easier transition for those to get into some of the topics that are sometimes difficult. But you write them with such creativity and passion. So 10 shocking truths about managing grandchildren in the family business. And you won't believe number 7, which we'll get to in a second. Number 2, don't fear the 2024 election. 5 proven growth tactics for family business owner. You talk about what marine dealers do. You talk about actionable steps that fuel dealers that can be used to boost growth and succession. I know you're trying to make this more palatable, aren't you? And maybe a little bit more digestible in what is a very sensitive subject.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm not quite sure who the marketing genius or ingenious was. The way that I feel about it is, but somewhere along the line, succession planning in some ways became a four-letter word to dealers, to business owners. When I share it at a conference or just interacting what I do, I see the eyes glaze over and they kind of slowly walk away from me because their thought is that I'm going to start talking about their exit, their retirement, and what's going to happen after death. And no, I don't know any human who really finds that exciting, especially an entrepreneur. And so what we're endeavoring to do is flip the switch on what people think succession planning is, because the type of succession we do is all about growth, creating options for the dealer and the family, so they can essentially write their story on their terms. They're not being pushed out. They're not having family turmoil of who's going to be king or queen. They're not in turmoil with the manufacturer because there has been a lot of strategy and thought put forth to essentially proactively address any issue. And so when it comes to circling back to what you mentioned about content, what we want to do is, one, really get drilled down to what are the nitty-gritty issues that people are dealing with on a daily basis, and that can, one, cloud their excitement for the business, cloud their excitement for being in a family business, and then educate and provide them insight on growth and succession strategies. And the way that we look at succession is, how do you succeed through any transition? Succession just isn't about ownership transition or ownership exit. It's how do we thrive in turbulent times? How do we succeed through events like COVID? How can we think ahead and create opportunities for us that if we see evidence that something's going to happen in the future that could impact our business, how can we already have strategies in place to be able to actively, for lack of a better term, the hated word during COVID, pivot and capitalize on opportunities versus being left behind and being in a fear state.
Yeah. Number 7, by the way, in that list of managing the truths about managing grandchildren, I found most interesting. Number 7 out of the top 10 shocking truths: expect your kids to ask, "Why didn't you treat me like that?" And I mean, there couldn't be any more common sense approach, Kendall, to any of this. You know, when the parent says to the child, "Well, you were my child, not my grandchild," and the difference in treatment is natural. How do you come up this common sense approach to a lot of the directives that you give out?
I think one is experience, having 50 years of experience in working with hundreds of family businesses of all industries, of all sizes. There are definitely nuances and complexities when it comes down to industry specific, and for sure in the car business, because it's such a complex business. But often a lot of these issues outside of industry specific comes down to basic, or not basic, but just humanity things. And I would say things that we all assume that we've been taught, from communication, from emotional IQ, things like that. But oftentimes what it is that we've just followed by our parents' example, by our grandparents' example. And most often those generations haven't been taught, because I would say self-awareness and a lot of the stuff that's talked about now from organizational psychology is a fairly new philosophy. And so when we talk about the different tips and things like that, it's okay, if we actually step back and think about how do we want to be treated? How then would someone else want to be treated, especially from a leadership perspective? It's pretty basic, but it's things like, I remember, for example, not to overshare, but I was working with a therapist. I wanted to enhance my communication style, one internally with my family. And I was like, I just want to be able to deal with conflict better. I feel like I'm not doing well with that. And she said, well, have you been taught? And I was like, in my mind, I was like, well, I'm in my 30s. Of course I've been taught. I'm an adult. And then I realized, no, I have not been taught. And so a lot of the content that we want to put out are these simple tricks that I think we all assume that we know, but we actually don't, because there's no high school class or college class on interpersonal dynamics, which is probably one of the most important things that all humans could learn to do.
Yeah, indeed. What's the most common mistake that you see when families either start to plan succession, or maybe it's the opposite, don't plan succession?
I think the don't plan.
You know, yeah.
I would think, assuming they have it done because their attorney and CPA have written up some documents, have addressed some tax issues. And so I think that's the biggest roadblock that we see dealers face with, that they think they have it done because they have their estate planning done for business agreements, but that's really about 20% of what goes into growing and sustaining a business. And if you think about taxes and estate planning, that's really just personal to the owner. That's not addressing anything with the business. And then I also think another one is, oftentimes when we work with people, they'll say, we didn't even realize there was someone out there that does this, that could help us with this. In the sense of, how do you, for one term, professionalize the family business? They've, again, like going back to what I was saying before, there's these generational approaches to the business and to communication and to family that's just kind of inherently passed down. And so, especially even in the Rawls Group, it's a family business. So there are some generational things that are core to how our family operates and communicates, which within our unit, it seems normal. But when you get outside of the world, into the world, you're like, I don't think this is normal. And so just assuming that your family style of communication and the dynamic is normal and healthy, and I'm not saying that it's bad, but when you bring that to a business scenario, especially in the car business, where there's hundreds of people depending upon your family to be successful for their lifestyle. And you look at, how's the culture responding to this? How are the key leaders responding to this? And you can see, like, whether or not you want to really own up and take a look at the culture and how things are performing. There is evidence if your family communication style or your culture, or what family, I would say, influence is rolling over to the business, there's evidence if that's good or if that's bad. And I think, so the second one is not engaging in some of the hard topics, and also not leveraging a third party. A lot of this stuff is incredibly sensitive. There can be a lot of family baggage and stereotypes and assumptions. And so to try and do this yourself, especially when you're blending family dynamics and business complexity, a third party is really needed to be able to see the trees from the forest, provide some tough love and some accountability and some direction. So those are just a few.
Amazing. This is your 20th year in your own family business.
Yes.
You learned a couple things along the way, I'm guessing, that you could apply to your clients, perhaps.
100%. I would say, oftentimes when talking to friends, you're like, oh, you're like the cobbler who doesn't have perfect shoes. And I mean, I think in some ways, yes, but in some ways, families and, they're made of humans, and that there's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of changing dynamics. Human nature is unpredictable. I mean, can be predictable or unpredictable. So in those 20 years, I would say many of the Rawls Group can very much relate to the pros and cons of blending family and business, the pros and cons of knowing someone. Like, a lot of the key leaders have known me since I was 16. So how do you overcome what stereotype they have on you based upon knowing when you were 16, and I'm now 44. So can very much relate to the bruises, I would say that the wins and losses, and the struggle that family businesses go through. And not just the way that we define family is two or more people working together for reasons other than money. So that could include the key leaders, because it's a maturing process. It's an evolution of giving each other benefit of the doubt, of noticing growth. And oftentimes that's not easy to do as humans.
There's a ton of content on the website. There is an appearance and many appearances by a resident MD known as the Succession MD. You celebrate succession. There's a succession podcast. There are discussions, women in leadership, client success stories, all of that. SeekingSuccession.com, the Rawls Group. And thank you for putting out so much great content, Kendall.
Absolutely. We're very passionate about family businesses, succession planning, and really want to help educate the greater market. So they're proactive in this. There's too much change happening in our world on a daily basis for business owners to be on their heels and thinking that the chips will fall where they may. One of the things I think is so interesting is the dynamic of in a family business. Generally, parents will try to do for their kids something better than what they had. I mean, or even basic to if they have bad teeth, let's get them braces. Let's put them in the best school that we can. But it's amazing to me when it talking to business owners and dealers about succession planning, they don't want to position their next gen where they have that for something better than they had. It's something that I don't know if it's afraid of moving on or engaging in, or they think they have it all done. But there's so many times I've talked to dealers where they've said, oh, when my dad passed, my brother and I had to figure it out and we almost lost the business. But my kids will figure it out too whenever I go. And so think about I don't love the word legacy when it comes to succession planning. I think it's overused in some ways, but our content is in the purpose and the hope is that it can help change the perspective of succession planning, provide some easy to implement solutions. So even if we're not working with them, they have some additional insight to better position their next generation in a position that was better than they had.
Excellent stuff. Kendall Rawls, thank you so much for being on the program. It's been great to catch up with you again, and we look forward to hearing more from the Rawls Group in the future.
Likewise. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. That's the 34th episode of Full Throttle, and a special thanks to my guest, Kendall Rawls of the Rawls Group. For more information on the Rawls Group, go to SeekingSuccession.com. And thank you for listening. For a library of these episodes with industry leaders, go to thepresidiogroup.com. I'm your host, Jason Stein. We'll talk to you again next time.